It was 12:02 a.m. when the screen flickered, connecting 5 faces from 5 cities: London, Tokyo, Sydney, Berlin, New York. These were the 5 CEOs I had spent 3 decades cultivating into not just clients, but allies. We were 48 hours from closing a $1.6 billion multilateral deal. Martin Kessler appeared in the center tile, leaning back in his chair like he owned the oxygen in the room. "Effective immediately," he said. "Your position is terminated." My eyes darted from tile to tile, expecting at least one flicker of confusion or protest. Instead, they just watched, silent, unreadable. No applause for Martin's decisive leadership, no murmurs of sympathy for me, just observation, as if they were assessing a market tremor. The air in my apartment thinned. My desk lamp suddenly seemed too bright, every paper on my desk too sharp in focus. Right in front of me lay the medical invoice for my sister's next round of cancer treatment, a total I could only cover with the performance bonus tied to this deal. The deal I had shepherded from napkin sketches to final clauses. The deal Martin had just detonated with one sentence. Martin kept talking, shifting to the continuity plan and how fresh leadership would guide the closing. His voice had that smug cadence that makes bad news sound like an opportunity, for him. And then I heard it, in the middle of his HR scripted termination line. He had recited, word for word, the exact retention clause embedded in my contract. "Effective immediately. Your position is terminated." To anyone else, it was legal filler. To me, it was the master key to our deal's execution system. The clause wasn't just about employment status. In our internal architecture, those words doubled as a control phrase. Used in the right context, they extended all contracts linked to my account. But said in a different context, especially a public one like this call, they triggered an automatic void across every pending contract I had authored, including this $1.6 billion agreement. Martin thought he'd humiliated me in front of my most valuable clients. In reality, he'd just yanked the emergency brake on his own train, and the passengers in London, Tokyo, Sydney, Berlin, and New York all knew it. I didn't need to speak yet. The silence was already working. 30 years. That's how long it took to take a $40 million regional logistics brokerage and turn it into a global name that could walk into any boardroom with credibility. I was there for every late-night call, every cross-continental negotiation, every nail-biting customs clearance that decided whether a client's product launched on time or died in a warehouse. 140 long-term contracts, not one of them ending up in court. That wasn't luck. It was the result of stubborn work and an obsession with trust. I learned early on that a handshake could still mean something if you made it mean something. I knew every CEO, every procurement director, every operations lead we worked with, not just by title, but by the way they took their coffee, how they signed their emails, what kept them awake at 3 a.m. I built those relationships brick by brick. If a client's quarterly numbers were slipping, I was there before they called. If a shipment was stuck halfway across the Pacific, I was already tracking it before the alert hit their inbox. My loyalty wasn't to quarterly profit margins. It was to the people who trusted me with theirs. That's why it still stings when I think about the morning I overheard Martin Kessler claiming he alone had landed our latest $120 million shipping contract with a European automotive giant. I could have corrected him in front of the entire senior team. I didn't. Not because I agreed, but because I've never needed the room to know it was my signature that closed the deal. What Martin never knew, and probably still doesn't, is that one of our most lucrative clients, a household appliance manufacturer in Southeast Asia, was seconds away from pulling their $90 million 7-year contract. Their CEO had called me personally, voice shaking, to say he couldn't focus on the negotiations because his teenage son had been arrested abroad. Within hours, I had an attorney from my own network on a flight to that city. I stayed up all night coordinating embassy calls and arranging private transport for the boy when he was released. The contract was signed 2 days later. No public thanks. No bonus. Just a quiet word from their CEO. You saved more than my business. That deal still accounts for nearly 8% of the company's revenue, the kind of figure Martin brags about in shareholder meetings, without ever understanding how close it came to disappearing. I'm proud of what I built. But pride tastes different when you know the credit has been repackaged, sold, and claimed by someone who would have let it all burn if it didn't fit neatly into a quarterly report. It's a strange mix, standing in the shadow of your own work, still holding your head high, knowing the truth doesn't need to be spoken to be permanent. Martin had always been the kind of leader who believed in winning fast, even if it meant skipping the work that made a win sustainable. To him, process was a nuisance, caution was weakness, and due diligence was for people who couldn't close. I'd spent my career doing the opposite, building stability by honoring every step, every agreement, every person involved. That difference had been simmering between us for months. And now, it was reaching a boil. I still remembered the last major meeting we attended together, a high-profile presentation to one of our oldest and most lucrative clients. Martin, in his eagerness to impress, cut the assessment phase entirely. He went straight into promising delivery dates and discount structures without verifying if their back-end systems could even handle the integration. I could feel the client's mood shift the moment he dismissed their project manager's concerns. By the end of the hour, the room was polite but cold, and it took me 3 weeks of late-night calls to repair the damage. Martin, of course, called it momentum. That was Martin's style, flashing a polished front while leaving the foundation to rot. And now, as we stood on the brink of a $1.6 billion deal, I could see him circling the same pattern again. This time, however, there was something else in his posture, a kind of calculated detachment, as if the deal itself wasn't the main prize. The answer came from an unexpected place, a quiet message from someone in operations, someone who owed me nothing but trusted me enough to risk telling me the truth. Martin wasn't just using this contract as a crowning achievement for the company. He was using it as his personal ticket upstairs, a bargaining chip for an executive position in a far larger firm. And part of that negotiation, I learned, involved streamlining leadership. In other words, removing me. Hearing that, I felt a sharp, controlled heat run through me, not the kind that burns wild, but the kind that forges metal. My contempt for him was cold, precise, and almost clean. He wasn't just reckless, he was willing to gamble with the trust I'd built over 3 decades, with relationships I'd cultivated in boardrooms, warehouses, and quiet airport lounges at midnight. I said nothing, because contempt held in silence is sharper than any confrontation. If Martin thought this deal would carry him to a higher seat while erasing me, he had underestimated the depth of the ground he was standing on and the fault lines already forming beneath it. Most people thought the company's biggest asset was the contract portfolio itself. They were wrong. The real crown jewel was the defense system I had designed to guard it, a layered network built to ensure no single breach could ever compromise the whole. Each contract's data was split into 5 encrypted segments, each stored independently with one of our top 5 clients. Even if someone accessed one segment, it was useless without the other 4. Every year, the system required a renewal process, an authentication sequence only I could complete. It wasn't a password you could guess or a code you could steal. It was a phrase, a living sentence that had to be spoken in the exact cadence and context I had set when the system was born. The words were meaningless on their own, but to the right listener, in the right moment, they unlocked the bridge between all 5 clients' data vaults. Martin had never liked that level of control being in my hands. He once joked during a board dinner that the system was part Fort Knox, part fairy tale. But I noticed how often his humor circled back to it, how carefully he listened when I handled renewals. It told me one thing: he wanted access without me. What he didn't know, and what no one outside my small design team knew, was the insurance clause I'd hidden in the architecture. If the key phrase was ever spoken outside its intended setting, wrong room, wrong audience, wrong timing, the system didn't just deny access, it voided every active contract tied to it, automatically, permanently. That safeguard had been born from necessity. After watching a competitor lose billions when their CTO's password was leaked during a casual conversation at a trade conference, I wasn't going to let our future hinge on luck or discretion. I had built something stronger, something that demanded respect for process and precision. Now, standing across from Martin in the glass-walled conference room, I could see the faint glint in his eyes as he tried to edge the conversation toward system renewal. He thought he was subtle. He wasn't. I matched his pace, answered just enough to keep him thinking he was in control, all while guiding the conversation into harmless channels. Quiet control isn't about winning the moment. It's about making sure the moment never becomes dangerous. Martin didn't realize it yet, but the closer he got to the key, the more he was tightening the lock himself. Martin stood at the head of the long walnut conference table, his reflection crisp in the polished surface. 5 CEOs, each representing contracts worth hundreds of millions, sat evenly spaced along its length. They were men and women used to controlling boardrooms, but today, their eyes tracked him with the same quiet calculation they might use on a volatile stock. "Effective immediately," Martin announced, voice swelling with the confidence of someone who believed the room was already his. "There will be a change in personnel leadership for your accounts. Tessa will no longer be your primary liaison. I will be taking over all strategic negotiations moving forward." I didn't flinch. My chair was angled slightly away from the table, just enough to keep my face out of his direct line of sight, but still within range to read the micro-reactions in the room. No one applauded, no one smiled. The only sound was the faint hum of the recessed ceiling lights. One CEO, Carver, glanced down at his pen, rolling it between his fingers. Another, Drayton, leaned back, folding his arms. The air was still, but it was not warm. Martin didn't notice, or perhaps he mistook the silence for reverence. He smoothed the lapel of his tailored jacket and continued. "This transition ensures faster execution, no unnecessary steps, no bureaucratic delays. We'll streamline everything so you can focus on growth." He smiled, the kind of smile that asked for validation. Still, nothing. Then he said it, word for word, the exact 12 syllables that, if spoken aloud in this precise sequence during a live client briefing, would trigger the security protocol I had embedded deep in the contract system. "And all engagements shall be consolidated under new authorization," he declared, his tone firm, oblivious to what he had just done. I kept my expression neutral, even as I felt the silent shiver of systems responding in the background. Somewhere, 5 independent servers, each holding a critical fragment of our joint agreements, had just executed a simultaneous lockdown. Every contract, every clause, every payment schedule was now marked void pending reauthorization. The CEOs knew. I saw it in the faint tightening of their jaws, the sudden stillness in their posture. But they didn't move to stop him. They simply watched, letting the moment settle like dust over polished wood. I sat back, hands loosely clasped, eyes fixed on Martin's self-satisfied grin. He thought he'd made his announcement. What he didn't realize was that he'd also made mine, without me saying a word. The notification ping was faint, but in the silence of the boardroom, it might as well have been a gunshot, one by one. The phones and tablets belonging to the 5 CEOs lit up with the same bold red banner. Contract status. Inactive. Immediate attention required. Martin paused mid-sentence, his hand hovering over the laser pointer. His brow furrowed for only a second before he forced his voice back into its earlier confidence, as though nothing had happened. "As I was saying, with these leadership changes..." But the momentum was gone. The CEOs were no longer looking at him. Carver, seated nearest the head of the table, unlocked his tablet, his eyes narrowing. Across from him, Drayton's gaze lifted just enough to meet Carver's in a silent exchange that carried more weight than any verbal question could. Tokyo's CEO, Yamada, shifted slightly in his seat, his polished cufflink catching the light. He scrolled through the notification, the scrolling motion slow, deliberate, as if savoring each word. Beside him, Laurent from Paris adjusted his glasses and leaned toward Yamada's screen for a better view. I didn't move. My hands rested lightly on my notebook, my pen still capped. From where I sat, I could see every subtle twitch of confusion ripple across the faces of people who rarely allowed themselves to display anything but control. It was a rare thing, watching certainty drain from a room. Martin's voice grew tighter, pushing forward as though sheer willpower could erase the sudden undercurrent of doubt. These updates will position us to act faster and— Mr. Martin! Yamada's voice cut cleanly through the air, calm but unyielding. His English was precise, the kind that left no room for misinterpretation. Why does my contract now show as no longer valid? Martin blinked. I'm sorry? Yamada didn't repeat himself. He simply rotated his tablet to face the center of the table. The words inactive, reauthorization required, glaring in stark black and red. The others followed suit, devices sliding forward like playing cards in a game none of them had agreed to join. I allowed myself the smallest inward breath, the quiet satisfaction settling deep. This was exactly how the trigger had been designed. No alarms, no overt collapse, just a silent shift that only the right eyes would notice. And here they were, all noticing at once. Martin's attempt at a laugh was thin, brittle. That must be a glitch. Our systems are secure, I'm sure. 5 separate contracts. Laurent interrupted, his voice low but edged with steel. All inactive, at the same time. No one looked at me. They didn't need to. The silence had its own direction, and it was pointing away from Martin. I kept my eyes on the tabletop, letting the hum of the air conditioning fill the space between their questions and his scrambling answers. This was their moment to confront him, not mine to take credit. The satisfaction wasn't in being seen. It was in knowing the right people had just realized something very wrong had happened, and that I was the only one who could fix it. Martin stood at the polished mahogany podium, his voice carrying through the packed press room like he'd just saved the company from the brink. The technical issue has been fully resolved, he announced, pausing just long enough for cameras to flash and microphones to crowd closer. All contracts remain intact. Our clients can rest assured. There is no threat to the integrity of our agreements. The words rolled off his tongue smoothly, rehearsed to perfection. Around the room, journalists scribbled notes, a few nodding as if they'd just been fed the headline they'd been waiting for. Behind them, screens displayed looping B-roll footage of smiling employees and bustling offices, as though the crisis had never existed. Back at headquarters, the ripple effect was immediate. Traders who had been dumping shares all morning slowed their sell-offs. The market's heart rate, measured in tickers and graphs, began to steady. Inside the building, staff who had been bracing for layoffs let out visible sighs. Conversations that had been whispered now grew louder, carrying hints of cautious optimism. Someone even uncorked a bottle of champagne in the marketing department, its muted pop echoing faintly down the hall. I watched it all from the glass-walled mezzanine, leaning against the railing as if I had nowhere more important to be. From here, I could see their relief settling in like a warm blanket, keyboards clattering again, phones ringing, shoulders relaxing. They believed him. They actually believed him. But I knew better. Martin's solution wasn't a solution at all. It was a simulation, a shell program designed to mimic contract verification without ever touching the actual legal framework. It could trick the system into displaying a green active status. Sure, but under every jurisdiction that mattered. Those agreements were still dead. In the eyes of the law, they might as well have been printed on blank paper. He'd bought himself time, nothing more. From my vantage point, I could see him exiting the press room, shaking hands with board members who looked as if they'd just dodged a bullet. The Tokyo CEO, one of the 5 who had been in that room when Martin triggered the deactivation phrase, stood a few steps back, his expression unreadable. Our eyes met for the briefest moment across the lobby's polished expanse. I wondered if he suspected the same truth I carried. Down below, a group of junior analysts laughed nervously, passing around a tablet with the market's rebound graph on display. "We're back," one of them said, relief dripping from every word. I kept my arms folded, letting the scene wash over me without changing my expression. I could already see the cracks forming, the way some executives avoided eye contact, the faint shadow of doubt in a few investors' statements. The market was calm for now, but it was the kind of calm you get before the second storm. The one no one sees coming. Martin believed the facade would hold. Everyone else wanted to believe it. And I knew it was just a matter of time before the truth burned through every illusion he'd built. The screen went dark the moment Martin ended the call, his confident smile frozen in my mind like a relic of a losing game. For a beat, the virtual boardroom was silent, the weight of unspoken thoughts hanging in the air. Then, one by one, the small icons of the 5 CEOs flickered back into life. Not with Martin, but with me. "Are we still on the secure line?" asked Akira Sato from Tokyo, his tone low, deliberate. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, measured. "This is direct, no company servers." Their faces shifted, tension giving way to something sharper, calculation. "We've been waiting for this moment," said Clara Ruiz of Madrid, her dark eyes unflinching. "Martin's announcement only confirmed what we've suspected for months." "Suspected?" I prompted, keeping my expression neutral even as my pulse began to race. "That his leadership is a liability," interjected Lucas Graham from Toronto. "Deals wobble under him, promises evaporate. The only thing holding us was the framework you built." Tessa. Hearing it said aloud, without hesitation, was like feeling the tide shift under my feet. "I take it," I said slowly. "You're not interested in renewing under the current management." "Not just not renewing," Sato replied. "We're terminating, effective immediately." I let the words settle. This was the pivot point, the moment I'd been calculating for months. Clara leaned forward, her voice soft but cutting. "We want you, your system, your oversight. We will follow you, wherever you choose to go next." In the corner of the screen, Henrik Voss from Oslo gave the faintest of nods. "Martin thinks this collapse began today," he said. "It didn't. He lost us long ago. We just needed a reason to walk away cleanly." A small smile threatened at the corner of my mouth, but I kept it in check. "And now you have one." "Yes," Henrik confirmed. His own arrogance gave it to us. There was a pause, the kind that isn't empty but full of decisions, full of futures being quietly redrawn. "I'll move quickly," I told them. "When we step out of their framework, we'll need airtight agreements. My structure will give you security Martin can't offer." "Send us the draft," Clara said. "We'll sign within the week." It was almost anticlimactic, how cleanly the shift occurred. One moment, I was the woman they thought had been cast aside. The next, I was the gravitational center pulling them into a new orbit. As the call ended, their trust lingered in my ears like a pulse. The power wasn't just back in my hands, it had been there all along, waiting for the right fracture in Martin's facade. And now, the break was wide open. This was no longer his game. It was mine. The news broke faster than I expected. By the next morning, every major business outlet had the same headline splashed across its homepage. Billion-dollar deal collapses overnight. Marquette systems in crisis. Television anchors analyze charts showing the company's stock plunging in real time. Each tick downward, sending a visible shiver through the market. Within hours, it had lost nearly a third of its value. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee in hand, scrolling through the coverage as if it were any other morning. The photo chosen by most outlets was perfect. Martin, jaw tight, sweat glistening under the conference lights from yesterday's press appearance, declaring the system was fully functional just hours before the contract self-destructed. Inside the company, panic had replaced the false sense of relief. I heard from a former colleague that shareholders were in uproar, demanding emergency meetings. Employees who had exhaled only yesterday were now holding whispered conversations in hallways, trying to calculate how many layoffs might come before month's end. The media was merciless. Article after article dissected Martin's leadership style, calling it reckless, arrogant, and dangerously out of touch with the technology that had once made the company a market leader. Analysts replayed his words from the press conference, comparing them to the legal reality of the contracts now void. Commentators didn't just question his competence, they named him as the root cause of the disaster. And then came the twist I'd been waiting for. Late that afternoon, a special statement from the board of directors hit the wire. The phrasing was cold, legal, and deliberate. The board has determined that Mr. Martin Ellsworth bears direct responsibility for the damages incurred due to breach of contract and will be held personally liable for compensation to affected partners. I read it twice, letting the words sink in. This wasn't just professional embarrassment. This was financial ruin. The kind no PR spin could erase. The same man who once sat across from me, dismissing my warnings with a smirk, now faced the prospect of paying, personally, for the collapse he tried to pretend would never happen. No one would know I was smiling as I closed my laptop. There was no need to gloat publicly, no need to send a message. The satisfaction came in silence, in knowing the sequence of events had unfolded exactly as it needed to. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispered in the space between breaking news alerts and the quiet sip of coffee at your own kitchen table. 3 months later, I was standing in the corner office of my own firm, a consultancy bearing my name on the frosted glass. It wasn't just the physical space that felt different. It was the air. No more walking on eggshells. No more watching someone else take credit for my work. No more worrying about whether the next boardroom meeting would be my last. The transition had been quicker than I imagined. Within weeks of leaving Marquette Systems, all 5 of my former major clients reached out. They had read the headlines, connected the dots, and decided they'd rather place their trust in the person who had built the system than the one who had destroyed it. Negotiations were straightforward, mutually respectful, free of the undercurrents that had poisoned my old office. Each contract was signed under my terms, with my rates, and with clauses ensuring my intellectual property remained mine. Financially, the difference was staggering. I was earning more than I ever had. But the real wealth came from ownership, the knowledge that every project I completed carried my name, my signature, my vision, and for the first time in years, I was treated as more than a replaceable cog. Clients valued my judgment. Partners respected my boundaries. My schedule was mine to design. My decisions, mine to stand behind. I had almost forgotten about Martin until the day his name popped up in a trade journal. Rumor had it he'd been turned down by 3 major firms, each citing leadership incompatibility as their polite excuse. The tech world was smaller than he liked to believe. Reputations traveled fast, especially the kind earned in public humiliation. And then came the irony no one could have scripted better. I was in the middle of a quarterly review with the executive team of a new client when HR forwarded me a candidate profile. Martin Ellsworth, seeking a senior role in the very company I now advised. His resume was polished, his bullet points carefully constructed, but his name carried the weight of every headline that had followed him. The CEO, a sharp woman with a talent for understatement, glanced at the file and then at me. "I assume this is self-explanatory?" I simply nodded. No words were necessary. The application never advanced. A week later, she stopped by my office carrying a small, wrapped box. "For your desk," she said. Inside was a sleek brass plaque, engraved in bold letters, "Never fire the one holding the key to your kingdom." I traced the words with my fingertips, a slow smile forming. It wasn't revenge in the loud, cinematic sense. It was something far better. The quiet assurance that I had rebuilt my career on stronger foundations, while the man who underestimated me now knocked on doors I had the power to close. Freedom wasn't just leaving the past behind. It was standing in the present, unshaken, knowing you had already won